Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be doing another AFL preview. We're going to be talking about Melbourne today, the 2021 Premiership winners, straight set losers last year in the 2022 season. We're going to be talking about what they can produce in 2023, and I'm joined to talk about them by two very lovely hosts. I'll start with Hamish. Hamish, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
And the man that literally has been at the Inner Sanctum longer than the Inner Sanctum itself, Jordan Danson. Jordan, how are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. It's good to be here.
It's good to see your face, mate. It's good to have you both on board for Melbourne. Firstly, let's just start with some thoughts about Melbourne coming into 2023. Hamish, obviously coming off of a straight sets loss in last year's final series. How are you looking at the D's coming into this year?
Oh, look, I think even though they had that September disappointment, they're still going to be a team to reckon with. We know that it wasn't too long ago that they won the premiership in pretty dominant fashion, and even though they had a few off-season changes, I just think the core nucleus of that list, like, it has all the makings to make another grand final run. I think last year proved that just because you have the talent, it isn't a lay down misere that you're going to make it, but still easily one of the teams to be threatened by every other team in the competition for the upcoming season.
JJ, do you feel that with Melbourne this year coming back in straight sets, you feel like they're going to bounce back?
Oh, they definitely should. They'll have the hunger in the belly. Especially, they were dominant throughout the first half of the season. Then after the bye, it's like everything went downhill. They had some off-field issues, and then the teams, sort of found them out. Once they found out they could, bypass Stephen May and Jake Lever and even Maxi Gawn in the back line, teams just, they scored a little bit too easy.
Yeah, definitely. And they've had a few ins and outs across the off season for the D's, and most notably Luke Jackson, the big one, going to Fremantle in the trade period. They've also lost Sam Wiedemann. Toby Bedford went off to GWS. Mitch Brown retired. Majak Dawes retired. Oscar Baker delisted. Jaden Hunt went off to West Coast, and a few others as well have left the D's. Do you feel like these outs, Hamish, are going to have an impact for them coming forward?
Well, I think the big name that kind of jumps out at you is Luke Jackson, of course, third-year player, but he was so instrumental in that premiership. I think everybody remembers that third quarter against the Bulldogs at Optus where Maxi Gawn quite happily sat on the bench while Jackson just took the ball by the horns in the ruck and really set up that incredible surge they had in the latter half of the game. Look, you draft a player at pick number 3 to win you a premiership. He's done that, but I reckon a lot of D supporters would be disappointed because he's just got such unlimited potential. I think in terms of everyone else who left, you're looking at a lot of depth players or players who are on the fringes. They, of course, won the VFL premiership last year, so I think it speaks to, obviously, what depth they had in their list. Jaden Hunt was always a player on the fringes, and going to West Coast, he now probably gets a guaranteed spot. I guess the other player who left who might be a bit of a loss is Tony Bedford, because he was someone Simon Goodwin talked about immediately after that semi-final loss to Brisbane as someone who might get a bit more game time, but obviously probably a lure of a guaranteed spot at GWS was too good to pass up. But I think they've been able to retain, a lot of the core players on their list who have been so influential to their success so far.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like even though they have lost Luke Jackson and the taller frame players, JJ, I feel like they have retained a bit of that with the trade of Brodie Grundy.
No, absolutely. You could probably say it's an upgrade, even though Luke Jackson is such a talent. He's probably a bit more mature, obviously at 28 years old. But two-time All-Australians and best and fairest don't grow on trees, and to have someone as the quality as Grundy, even though he got injured late last season, and it did show, the players clearances, that went down. But when Maxi Gawn, needs a rest, or next best option, you got Brodie Grundy. That's not not a bad option.
Yeah, definitely. They didn't really go too hard in either the draft or the trade period. They did pick up Josh Schache, a couple of rookie draft picks as well with Oliver Sestain and Will Ferrell, not Will Ferrell. They've also picked up Kaya Farris-White, and then obviously their main draft pick 38, Jed Adams. So, Hamish, I feel like even though they didn't have a strong draft, they still have a lot to play with in terms of how much depth is on their list.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think as you touched on the draft, the players who they took aren't necessarily going to be the guys who you see in their first seasons or even second seasons. There was a pretty clear focus on getting in some height. Matthew Jefferson, 195 centimetre key forward, was the best key forward on the board at that stage, had a good season for Oakley. Like most young, tall players, he's got a pretty lanky frame, so we'll need a few years to develop and pack on some muscle, but he's one to watch for D supporters. In a few years, Oliver Seston, even though he was the last pick they took in the rookie draft, he's a great story of someone who didn't even play in the NAB League in his draft year. Instead, he was playing for Xavier College and in the Mansfield and for the Mansfield Football Club in the Goulburn Valley League. But he's just a real great story of a bolter who obviously was overlooked by a lot of the talent scouts, but just jumped out of nowhere to get a spot with one of the best teams in the competition. So hopefully he can continue that journey and become a real feel-good story.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like as well with the Ds, they still have that high caliber in the middle order. To at least, that 15 to 30 playing group can also play a massive role. So I don't feel like they're going to lack too much there. But JJ, they haven't been in the news too much, the Ds, and they've sort of flown under the radar a bit. I think a lot of people's predictions are expecting them to bounce back, but also some are a little bit concerned with the way they're tracking. Obviously, Christian Salem's just come out with a little bit of a thyroid injury, I think, only a few days ago. So how have you seen their preseason to date in terms of how they're tracking?
So Christian Salem, yeah, definitely a huge loss. We saw how important he was to their ball movement and their structure in the defensive end in their premiership season. He provided them with a lot of move and carry off the half-back line, but as we've said, they've got plenty of depth there with Bowie and all that, and even Angus Brayshaw who could potentially move back there. So even though it's bad news early in the preseason, I think they should be all right.
Definitely. And we'll move into the questionnaire because I really want to get to know your guys' thoughts on how the Ds are going to track this year and dive in a little bit more. So from both of you, Hamish, we'll start with you. How did you judge the Ds preseason as a whole?
Yeah, well, I think as you touched on, it's been a relatively low-key one. Obviously, the Christian Salem injury, as JJ touched on, is a big loss, and with no time frame when he'll return, that's not good news for them. There was also an injury scare with Max Gorn, but he looks all good to be ready for round one. Probably all the track watchers with their binoculars have been looking at how he and Brodie Grundy are working in tandem. It's probably one of the biggest questions we're looking to be answered when they finally get on the park together. But by all accounts, Brodie Grundy's training well, and more than anything else, he's healthy after missing most of last season, which I'm sure would make a lot of D supporters very happy.
JJ, how did you feel the Ds went across the preseason?
Much like Hamish, very well. I saw in recent days that they're doing the little moves. They've moved Cosy Pickett into the midfield, so we might see him in the middle a bit more. And, with all that pizzazz he has, anything can happen. And hopefully we see him bounce back after a, kind of low season last year.
We'll go into the fantasy picks. I want to get both of your thoughts as well. Hamish, if there's one Ds player you're picking for your fantasy or Supercoach team, who are you picking?
It's a bit of a basic one, but we know how valuable ruckman are in just both fantasy and Supercoach. And I think when you're looking at ruckman, it's hard to go past the best one in the game, and that's Maxi Gorn. He hasn't shown any reason to think that he'll lower his colours next year, even though it'll be interesting to see the kind of minutes he gets with Brodie Grundy in the side. Of course, probably the one big loss for fantasy players is you can no longer have Grundy and Gorn in the same side since they'll actually now be on the same team. So I think that will be the biggest shake-up, if nothing else. But I think Max Gorn's just proved to be such a reliable player over so many years, and that he's going to get the numbers, not only in the ruck, but with the way he moves around the ground. So I think he's an instant lock for most players.
JJ?
I'm going to go with Clayton Oliver. I think that's an easy one, I think. We all obviously know he's, scoring talent. He averaged 127 last season, all right? So he's obviously going to be in everyone's Supercoach team. He'll definitely be in mine. But, as I said, one of the most consistent midfielders, and, he's always a captain and vice-captain option every week. So I'll be going to Clayton Oliver.
It's the two most basic fantasy Supercoach picks I've seen since doing these previews. So well done, lads. That's fantastic. One change that needs to be made for the D's, JJ.
One move that needs to be changed is I'm going with Angus Brayshaw to the half-back line. We saw late in the year after he signed his new contract, he moved into the midfield and he looked good. But I just think, at the start of the year, when he had to move due to necessity and how well he played, even, in that round clash against the Bombers, he had 34 disposals and then he had 20 marks. And you don't normally see that from a half-back. So, as I said, Christian Salem's not there, as we mentioned. So Angus Brayshaw will slot in very nicely in that position.
I think he's going to be in my Supercoach team, I reckon, the way you've just described that. Hamish, what are you most excited for the D's in 2023?
Oh, look, there's a lot to like, but I think the question everybody's looking at is how Brodie Grundy and Max Gawn will work together. We know the calibre of players they are. They've shared all Australian teams before now, they're actually in the same team. I think we saw with Max Gawn and Luke Jackson, you can have two really top quality ruckmen work in that Melbourne lineup. But it will be a big question to see how they're actually configured on the ground. As Gawn start in the ruck and is Grundy on the bench, or do we see what we saw at the end of the last season with Gawn lining up forward and Grundy in the ruck? I think Gawn obviously covers the ground really well. He's a great contested mark at either end of the ground, while Grundy, it's kind of the cliche phrase everyone said about him throughout his career, but he's that extra midfielder. He's really good at ground level. He gets you clearances. So I think just managing that balance, having, two top dog alphas duking it out, they're both pretty laid back personalities. So I think they'll be able to work, but how it actually plays out on the park will be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I did like that. The last time I reckon I saw Brodie Grundy and Max Gawn in the same team was my 2019 dream team. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. JJ, who is it a big year for?
I've got Tom McDonald, or the Melbourne forward line. Last year, after Tom McDonald went down, he played the 9 games. Melbourne forward line went to kaput. You know what I mean? They couldn't find anyone up forward. They had Ben Brown. Although he kicked 30 goals, he's playing a different role. He's playing that contested mark role, and that that's not his go. He likes to get up the ground, and then run back. Then even had Bailey Fritsch, who had to play taller and heavier than he is. But so hopefully, if Melbourne fixes their forward line, I'm thinking they're in for a good year.
Lovely. Look, who's ready for a breakout year, Hamish? Because I want to get your thoughts on this one as well.
I'm putting a bit of pressure on him because he hasn't played an AFL game yet, but second-year key forward Jacob Van Rooyen. It's a name on every D supporter's lips because he's absolutely been lighting up the training track. The key reason why I think he's due for breakout years, as JJ touched on there, forward line was probably their one real weakness area. He's a young player, but showed some really good signs in the VFL last year and actually almost debuted in the semi-final loss to Brisbane because Max Gawn had a bit of a niggle. So he was very close to breaking in last year, but he's the type of player, even though he's key position size, he can play that third tall role. So he could slot in there with a McDonald and Brown. And I think just a lot of D supporters are really keen to see what he can do out there on the park because he has a pedigree of a first round pick and he's just been really showing a lot of positive signs and could just be that, extra excitement to get a young player in there to kind of rejuvenate the team after a disappointing end to the season last year.
Yeah, definitely a bit of fresh blood, I think, might help the D's up there, especially with Ben Brown and his contested game that he's starting to play. I don't think anyone wants to see that too much. So we'll wait and see how that pans out. I do like that pick, Hamish. This is, now, headline you'll see, a lot of people are giving me very questionable headlines. So I want to put the pressure on you both to see what you've got. JJ, I'll start with you. What's a headline you'll see in 2023?
Oh, this is a tough one, Ant. You put me on the spot. Let's see. Well, as we mentioned, I'm going to say that the headline we'll see is the Brodie Grundy trade for Melbourne has paid off.
I love that. That's very nice. That's up there, I reckon. Hamish, what's yours?
I know I'm flirting with a bit of danger because I've got two Port supporters on here with me, but I think Pickett re-signs with the D's 2-year deal. Sure, they'd love to see him at Alberton playing at the club where his uncle won a Norm Smith medal, but Look, I probably said the same thing about Luke Jackson last year and he left, so this is hardly a guaranteed take, but I just think the setup at Melbourne is so good to contend for a premiership, and he's such an important part of that side that I think it would be very hard to leave the club at the moment, despite a lot of interstate interest.
No, I like that. I like the commitment. I'm a very loyal person, so I love loyalty when I hear it, although he'll come to Alberton. But anyway, we'll talk about that another time. One game that is a much watch on the calendar this year. I'm going to start with you both again for this one. So we'll start with you, JJ. What's one match that you must watch for the D's this year?
Oh, it's pretty early on for D's fans. I'll probably have a keen eye on the round 2 clash against Brisbane. Even though it's at the Gabba and on Friday night, the D's, they were sent home by the Lions, so I'm sure there's a lot of revenge that they'd like to dish out on them.
Definitely, I like that. Hamish, what's yours?
Oh, well, for me, you don't have to look too far. I've gone with the next round 3 for the same reason, because they're playing the Swans, the other team who bounced them in the finals last year. I think, obviously, they're going to be a good side again. They made the grand final, and no pun intended, but to exercise their demons 2 games in a row, I think will be a really good indicator about where they're placed for season 2023.
I definitely think as well, if you look a little bit later down, against the Pies on the King's birthday, that day is going to be absolutely massive, and that could prove to be a crucial part in both teams' seasons. So looking forward to that, and I think Hamish will be as well. Minimum expectation for the D's this year, JJ. I feel like at least a finals win.
Oh, definitely. A finals win. You'd probably be hoping they make the grand final, wouldn't you? After especially making it 2 years ago and missing out, probably minimum expectation of a grand final, but that's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
You'd think, but you just never know. Hamish, what are your minimum expectations for the D's?
Look, I think it has to be a top 4 season at the very least, probably even top 2, because after winning a grand final in WA, they finally got some home finals at the MCG and they went out in straight sets. So their fans need to see a home final win. But look, it has to be top 4 with the talent they have. They showed last season, even with a few issues, that they're top 4 quality side. They finished second. So they just need to put themselves in the best position when September rolls around.
Definitely agree with that. And finally, where will the D's finish in 2023 on the ladder? JJ?
Well, I've got them top 4, but I've got them just sliding into the top 4, so maybe 3rd or 4th.
To be fair, with the way the top 4 goes these days, that's a home final regardless. Hamish, where have you got them finishing?
Look, probably a similar range. I did say they needed to get a home qualifying final, so I'll have them going second again. I think if they can get that, it would be massive just to set themselves up well. In theory, should get a prelim final berth out of that. They obviously showed last year that's not a guarantee, but look, this list is very good and they should be around the mark again.
Definitely, I like that. And for anyone that's watching at home, you definitely can subscribe to the YouTube channel for plenty more AFL previews. I will thank Hamish and Jordan for joining me for this Melbourne preview.
Thanks for having me, Ant.
Yeah, thanks
Melbourne
for having
play
me
the
on.
Dogs round 1 at the MCG. It's going to be massive for the D's this year, so make sure you tune in and see how they progress and see how we go in our predictions. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Sanctum YouTube channel.